For telling a bit of a story here, I was born in Australia, and my parents had actually left England after the war and moved to Uganda. And after a few years there, they moved to Australia, where most of my siblings were born, in Brisbane. And then in 1962, my dad got restless, and we left Australia and ended up in Kamloops, where he was a scientist with the federal government. And so all of us grew up in Kamloops, and my three older brothers and sisters went to UBC, and then the station that my father worked at was closed, and we were moved to Lethbridge, Alberta. So I ended up finishing high school in both Lethbridge, Alberta and Ottawa, and finished grade 12 in Alberta and went on to the University of Alberta, where I eventually went into medical school. And then after entering medical school, I got restless and decided that I would apply for a scholarship to go to England, and was successful in winning a Rhodes Scholarship and went off to Oxford for 2 years and studied law there because medicine wasn't easily transferable between England and Canada at the time. So after coming back to Canada, I finished my medical school in Edmonton and moved to Vancouver. So I was very glad to be back in British Columbia after being away for 13 years, and was glad to settle in Vancouver, and interned at St. Paul's Hospital in Vancouver and got my medical license, and went to work in Campbell River as a locum doctor, doing a summertime work while others were on holidays. And that went very smoothly and had a good time there. I actually went back there for 3 summers after moving around a little bit. And I decided that I would finish up the legal thing because they decided during that time that a Canadian law degree was required. So I went off to Nova Scotia and finished up a Canadian law degree in 8 months at Dalhousie University, and moved back to Vancouver and started training as a young lawyer, and went through what are called articles at a law firm and ended up getting called to the bar in 1988. So by that point I had both medical and legal qualifications, and decided to carry on with law, and worked for a year at a commercial firm, and then went off to work for 12 years at a firm that spent its time largely defending doctors in lawsuits. And that allowed me to move all around British Columbia, seeing different ways of practicing medicine and law in British Columbia. And it also carried on from my experience as a young doctor, where I'd worked in Dease Lake and Lillooet and Campbell River as a locum doctor. So I got to know British Columbia pretty well, having grown up in Kamloops and then worked in all kinds of different locations all around the province. So that was until 2001, and then the Liberal government came in Victoria in a big sweep, and I was asked to move over there as a deputy minister, which I did for 2 years in the Premier's office, and then 3 years in the Economic Development Ministry as the deputy minister. And that had kind of run its course by 2006, so I moved back to Vancouver and went back into legal practice, and did that until the 2013 election, when I was selected as the candidate and elected in the riding known as Vancouver-Quashena, which is on the west side of Vancouver. And I then took my place in the legislature, and Premier Clark asked me to be the Minister of Technology, Innovation and Citizen Services, which I was very glad to do. I was the Technology Minister from 2013 to the end of 2014, and then the two ministries swapped their ministers. I went to Advanced Education, and the Advanced Education Minister went to the Technology Ministry. And I've now been in Advanced Education for about 16 months, and it's gone very well from my perspective. We have about 430,000 students in the province at 25 public institutions and about 200 private institutions, and they function generally very well. There are ongoing issues that we have to help them to manage, but for the most part we send them $2 billion a year for their operational grants, and they then top that up with tuition and other revenue to provide all that education to all those students. About 190,000 of the students are full-time students, and they're the ones who are eligible for financial aid. And about 70% of them actually don't turn to the province for financial aid, they just finance their own education. And the results are extraordinary. We have a very satisfactory educational system in that we train people for every calling in life except veterinary medicine. That's the one that we farm out to the University of Saskatchewan, which runs the only veterinary school in Western Canada on behalf of all 4 of the Western provinces. So the system works remarkably well. On our visits to the 25 institutions, I routinely sit down with students and ask them two questions. One is your program living up to your expectations? And two, are you getting value for money? And it's remarkable how all around the province the students answer very positively to both. They are generally very pleased with their programs, with the quality of instruction, and with their job prospects. And they're also very, very pleased with what they're getting for what they pay. Family is in many ways the end of the British Empire. My mother was born in Northern England in fairly impoverished circumstances. My father was actually born in Calcutta in India. His father was a Church of England vicar there, which meant that he was a clergyman in the Anglican Church in Calcutta, and there was, I gather, enough people there to justify having a church. And so my father stayed there till the age of 4 and then moved back to England and went through his schooling from 1923 to 1939. And he actually went to Cambridge University for 2 years because they knew World War II was coming. They accelerated the degree programs and they graduated them all in batches in the summer of 1939. And he was told to take the summer off and be ready for his military call-up whenever it happened. And then the Germans invaded Poland on September 1st of 1939, and the war was underway. So he did 7 years in the British Army, and my mother left school before finishing high school and eventually ended up in the Women's Aviation or Air Force, known as the WAF. And so she went through World War II working largely underground at night with Fighter Command at a place called RAF Hornchurch, just east of London. And their job was to deploy the fighter forces to take on the German bombers. And so she was one of the people underground moving around the little models on the big table map of England. And of course she only met my father, who was in Algeria and Italy and back in India where he'd been born. And they reconvened in England when the war was over and met in a dance hall in Newcastle sometime in 1946, I guess. And they got married, and actually they didn't get married till he'd gone off to Uganda with his job and proposed to my mother by telegram, and she then flew out to Africa. She'd never been out of England, never been on an airplane, but she got on an airplane and ended up in Nairobi, went straight from the airport to the church, got married, and then they moved to Entebbe in Uganda. And my eldest sister was born there, and then they moved in 1950 to Australia, where my father took a job in the northern part of Queensland in a very, very hot place called Rockhampton. This is long before air conditioning or paved roads. It was a pretty rough life. Lots of cyclones and snakes and all that kind of stuff that kids love. So my two immediately older siblings were born there, and I was born after they'd moved to the big city in Brisbane, where the roads were paved and there were no snakes. As we all know, Vancouver and British Columbia more generally is a place that has welcomed immigrants for a long time. Our whole cultural base is defined by immigration. I'm an immigrant, and of course there are many immigrants here from around what used to be the British Empire and the British Commonwealth, and from China, which of course was never colonized. But lots of people have moved here because of the opportunities they find and the welcoming environment they've found. So we have a very large South Asian community here, a very large Chinese community here, as we all know. And we also have lots of people from places like Korea and Japan, and people like me who came from obscure places like Australia. And so it's great for us to be able to celebrate this diverse heritage with the community festivals that we have. We all know about Diwali, we all know about Chinese New Year, and they're major cultural fixtures here in Vancouver and around British Columbia, as people can really celebrate and enjoy multiple opportunities for fun. It's not just about Christmas, it's also about Diwali and Chinese New Year. So we try to enjoy ourselves year-round. It's kind of fitting that I'm in advanced education as the minister because I spent far too long in university myself. I went to university for 10 years, ended up collecting 6 university degrees, and I wouldn't recommend that to anybody. It was not a good use of time. But these days, advanced education really is the key to social mobility. People's opportunities to be their best really lie in going to institutions for higher education, whether that's Douglas College or BCIT or SFU. Everybody in our society knows that we have good quality institutions, and that acquiring the skills at those institutions will give them the opportunity to advance themselves in life, to get ahead and to seek the kind of prosperity that we all do. So that's one of the reasons why British Columbia is the magnet that it is for immigrants, because it's a place where everybody has the same access to that kind of higher education that leads to a good level of prosperity and the kind of peace and happiness that really we exist here for. For both young people and for new Canadians, I think the underlying message is this is a land of opportunity. You'll be treated fairly. There's an abundance of opportunity here. You just have to find the right space for yourself. And it may not be the thing you think about first. One of the things that we find when people come here from places like Germany and continental Europe is that they expect to be slotted into a role that they will fit for the rest of their life, whether it's to be a air conditioning maintenance technician or a dentist. But in this part of the world, people change their roles quite regularly, and they can do that through their education as well as in their occupation. So people here have diverse and interesting lives. I often tell the young people we meet that they'll probably change jobs 4 or 5 times in their life. I've been fortunate enough to change my role in the world 5 times, and it's worked out very well for me, and I hope that they have the same success that I have had and that they can look forward to the kind of prosperity they hope for.